Thank you, Chum.
Yeah, just for the audience, just for timing. If you've got anxiety, don't want to miss any of the action.
Am I able to screen share here? Because somehow the button for sharing my screen is off. And I need to share my screen because I have a bunch of PowerPoints.
That's a blackout question.
You can do share screen like what I did, but you would be sharing a program that allows both you and your PowerPoint to show up.
I think it's a little bit too late for that, but some of the share your screen button is not available.
I don't know if can more than one person share a screen. Like maybe Sunseed, are you sharing a screen right now?
Yeah. You think it's one at a time?
Maybe it's worth a try. I actually don't know.
Okay.
If you can like,
I stopped now.
Okay, I can share my screen now. Okay, perfect.
I guess that's the limitation of Discord. Sorry, guys.
No, it's good that we figured this out.
Sonseed, are you ready to begin?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So thank you everyone for coming. This is going to be a debate between Agamemnon on the evidentiary problem of evil. And we're going to start with 20-minute openings. So is there a preference between the two debaters who would like to go first?
I'm going first.
Yeah. Okay, I think that makes sense. All right, so go ahead. Take it away, Sunseed.
And let me get streaming my screen. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, we're good. It's showing.
All right. So you started the clock. I'm ready to go. Great.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Sunseed. Thank you to now officially Blackout and Chum for helping put this debate together. And thanks, Aga, for wanting to do a formal debate. A lot of people don't want to do formal debates, so this is going to be fun. Also, thank you for picking this topic because the evidential problem of evil, I think, is a very important argument. And so I want to give a presentation on it, unpack some parts that really strengthen the argument, and respond to potential objections to the argument. That's what I'm going to do in this opening statement. So the problem of evil, I should give a couple of definitions before I continue. First, I should define the God that the problem of evil is given to disconfirm. So the problem of evil disconfirms a God who is all-powerful, all-knowing, all good. These three attributes are important, and there are a couple more. God is a non-physical agent. God is eternal, and he's the author and sustainer of the universe. Our world is the product of God's actions. So the problem of evil is an argument against a God so defined. I'm just going to be using big G God from now on. All right, so let me give a nice syllogism for the problem of evil. This is the evidential form, and it goes P1, if God exists, then gratuitous evil does not exist. P2, gratuitous evils do exist. P3, therefore God probably does not exist. It's a very simple argument. This is a very old one, and it's a very powerful one. There's other ways of putting it. The amount of gratuitous evils disconfirms the existence of an all-powerful God. So other definitions, gratuitous evils. So there are observations we make of the world that we can identify as gratuitous evil. There's specifically evils that God has no justified good reason to permit or allow. So there's things like what's called moral evil, and that's evil that's the product of free agents. So the actions of Stalin, the actions of Hitler, causing horrible atrocities, those atrocities are attributed to the free will of Stalin and Hitler. Now, the evidential problem of evil focuses much more effectively on natural evil, which is evil that's brought about by natural processes. And since that gives you the stronger evidential problem of evil, I'm going to focus on those types of gratuitous evil. So before I go, how much time do I have left, Chum?
You're at 1645.
Thank you so much. Okay, so examples of gratuitous evil. Highlighting very profound examples is one of the best ways to give the evidential problem of evil. So you'll want to give examples of animal pain and suffering. The way evolution works requires tons of animal pain and suffering. For example, I'll go back to this slide. In order to eat an adorable sea lion or seal, killer whales will chase the seal around for hours and hours until it's so tired that they can just easily pull the sea lion off of this iceberg or ice flat and eat it. There's other countless types of pain and suffering. Animals are born, die, due to starvation, neglect, and interacting with other animals in extreme ways, like this interaction between this poor baby seal and these two benign killer whales. There's child and infant suffering, pain and suffering. Children are born with defects. There's parental neglect, and then there's other things like famine just affecting a whole society. This is a famous photo of a vulture just patiently waiting until this starving child can no longer defend itself from the vulture and other vultures coming to eat this child. There's plenty of more evils. For example, you can have evil that occur to elderly individuals. There's very famous people going through cognitive and bodily decline. The idea that we eventually die is considered a gratuitous evil. Having cancer, for example. And then a big natural type of evil are natural disasters, like floods, tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanoes. They can cause horrendous amounts of pain and suffering. So the evidential problem of evil, it looks at all this evidence of evil, all this evidence of pain and suffering, right? And it notes God is not limited like us. God's all powerful and could make a universe with less evil. God's all knowing. He knows the universe would have so much evil. God knows how to prevent evil. Like God could just make it so places with famine don't undergo the conditions that result in famine. Make it so vultures are vegetarians, for example. They wouldn't eat that poor starving child. Right? God is all good, and by common standards of morality, or consistent with common standards of morality, God would not want to allow so much evil. Oops. Right. So the problem of evil, it looks at the amounts of evil, especially the type that I've identified, and it says that the existence of such evil is evidence against God's existence. Yeah. Pretty good on time. So theists have attempted to respond to the problem of evil, and it's a very forceful problem, and so it means that these responses, they're called objections or theodicies, they don't really rise to the occasion, but there's some popular theodicies, which I'll define. Theodicies, they're attempts to explain the existence of evil. There's very popular theodicies that I'm going to show to be problematic in this opening. So let's see. So there's a classic one. It's called the privation objection. Evil makes us aware of the good. The issue with that is our awareness of the good doesn't require the gratuitous amounts of evil. Like if we're supposed to be aware of the color black, we can just show a small speck of white in order to contrast, to differentiate between those colors. All right, a very famous theodicy is the soul building theodicy. Evil, it just builds good character. You wouldn't learn to be humble if you didn't lose so many debates all the time. You wouldn't learn, to be courageous if you weren't put in like a situation where the odds are against you. There's a couple of issues with that. One of them is they're again pointing to the amount of evil that occurs. There's so many instances of evil that people would assume would be there to give people, good character qualities, but they don't because they just go unnoticed. A classic example is that there's a thicket in the middle of the forest that goes aflame and kills a baby deer, a fawn, without anyone noticing. Without anyone noticing this poor deer dying a slow, agonizing death. There's no one there to witness such a gratuitous evil. So how could they even learn from it? Another issue is that you can build bad character from experiencing these instances of evil. For example, many parents who have their children die in infancy, they often become cynical, or they become callous towards their partners, even divorce. They'll gain these bad characters in response. So the soul building theodicy doesn't. It seems pretty toothless. What else do I give? Yeah. There we go. So this next one is going to be more related to how I believe Aga debates, and it's sometimes referred to as the standard objection. That is, God's goodness is different from human goodness. Things that we might consider, evil might not be considered evil by God. Now, this is an admission that the commonly understood views of morality don't consider God a good God, given the gratuitous amounts of evil, which is a problem. But this also brings up a problem in that you can't really look at the world to try and predict God's moral conduct if the claim is that what we do see already and note as gratuitous evil, is consistent with the God being defended, right? If that's if that's what we would expect to see anyways, then we can't just blithely make a prediction. Oh, it's a good God, so we would expect to see rainbows and happiness and baby smile. We don't see that, and so this idea that God's goodness is different from ours renders prediction from God's conduct useless. Yeah, so I have a couple of other things I want to note, and let me see if I can get to it. I might just save it for the other one. Here we go. We got it. So one other thing I want to preempt is this idea of skeptical theism. Skeptical theism is a view that's offered against the problem of evil. And skeptical theism says we're not in a position to know whether or not God has good reasons to allow evil. Our puny, finite minds aren't God's mind. We don't have access to his reasons. And there's a couple of problems. One I'll mention, but I'm not going to flesh out too much, is that this view ultimately commits a theist to unlivable skepticism. This means that theists cannot say God has no good reason to make us think our five senses are being reliable or not. But there's other objections or implications for the skeptical theists that might even range outside of the problem of evil. For example, the skeptical theists can't be confident in their inferences from good states of affairs, from the good we see in the world, to God's existence. He can't point to things like design or even miracles as evidence for God. If you're claiming, like a skeptical theist, that we don't have access to such reasons. The other issue is that you're also undermined, or your assumptions are undermined in terms of being able to reliably, understand God's communication, or even understand how God communicated just through the natural world, if you're a skeptical theist. So I want to conclude my remarks here, and we'll go into, I guess we'll hear Aga next. This opening was meant to show that God's existence is disconfirmed by observed gratuitous evils. Theodicies and objections to the evidential problem of evil, they fail. They're not very good. And Aga, if he wants to respond to my argument from the problem of evil, he needs to show that there aren't worlds that are more or less likely to have existed, given the amounts of goodness in them. He needs to show. He doesn't need to show a mere possibility undermining the evidential problem of evil. He needs to show how the disconfirmation of gratuitous evil, making God's existence unlikely. He needs to show how that's not the case. Another thing I should note is Aga needs to defend a God who isn't just all good, isn't just all knowing. He needs to defend a God that is all powerful and all good, that is all knowing and all good. Because if he doesn't include being all good in his defense, then he's merely defending a God that's not consistent with the God I defined at the beginning of the debate. So how much more time do I have, Chum?
3 minutes and 15 seconds.
3 minutes. So, well, I just want to again thank everyone for coming in, and I'll actually stop here and let Aga go.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe, for your opening statement. And we're going to have Agamemnon give his opening statement now as well. So go ahead, Agamemnon. Whenever you're ready, I'll begin the timer.
Okay. I think Sunseed probably has to go off or has to stop screen sharing for me to be able to
Hold on a second.
share my screen.
There you go.
Let's see. You guys see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. All right. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to begin my opening statement now. So first of all, thank you for Sunseed for accepting the debate. I've been looking forward to debate for a long time, so I really appreciate it. Thank you for people in the audience for showing up so late. So for me, the problem of evil has always been the most serious objection to Christianity, because it's definitely a challenge for theists to explain how a good God could coexist with seemingly very poignant instances of evil. But I think ultimately Christians can come up with good, cogent explanations why evil and God can coexist. And I don't think these explanations are available to atheists. And since I think atheists can't avail themselves to these good, cogent explanations, I think classical theism better predicts the existence of conscious suffering compared to atheism. And therefore, I think the existence of conscious suffering actually, as paradoxical as this may sound, actually supports classical theism over atheism. So the version of the argument from evil I'll be working with is premise 1, if an all-good and powerful God exists, he should not allow pointless evils. Premise 2, pointless evils exist. Conclusion, an all-powerful good God likely does not exist. And of course, atheists think nature is rife with examples of pointless evils. For instance, Rowe in 1979 gives the classic case of a fawn trapped under a tree, burning to death in a forest fire. But as Rowe is quick to note, this doesn't amount to proof that God doesn't exist, because for all we can tell, this event was permitted in order to prevent an even greater evil from occurring. For instance, the sounds made by the deer could have caused 100 deer to run away from the forest fire. And the same principle applies to any evil. For any evil, we can think of an even greater evil that was prevented as a result. But Rowe rejoins that our experience and knowledge of the magnitude of suffering in our world sure makes it seem like this evil is utterly pointless. In nature, evil is widespread and systemic. According to Rowe, among philosophers discussing the problem of evil, there appears to be near universal agreement that the fawn's suffering will seem pointless to most people. So this is Rowe's central claim, that there appears to be near universal agreement that the fawn's suffering will seem pointless to most people. Here I'm going to give my first pushback to Rowe and to my opponent Sunseed, who uses these very same scenarios to argue for his case. Is it really the case that the fawn's death will seem utterly pointless to most people? Remember, Rowe and his defenders are just supporting one of the crucial premises of their argument with an appeal to intuition, what will seem obvious to most people. McAllister et al., 2024, put Rowe's claims to the test. They evaluated a sample of 1,500 randomly chosen participants and asked if they intuitively found the death of the fawn pointless. One half read the vignette about the fawn just as it appeared in Roy's 1979 paper. The other half of the participants in the vignette read a vignette which was accompanied by a description of the role of wildfires in forest ecosystems, including their contributions to the health of the ecosystem by clearing away dead organic material and leaving a topsoil dense in organic materials. To quote McAllister et al., one of the more notable results is how few people, only 12.6%, share any level of agreement with Rowe. Rowe thinks this is the typical example, this is the paradigm example of a pointless evil. So only 12.6% of people agree with Rowe about the gratuitousness of the fawn's suffering. They also found that inclusion of context dramatically diminished the perception of pointlessness. When people were given context, the agreement dropped to 3.5%. So 3.5% of people, when given context, agree with Rowe that the fawn's suffering is pointless. Agreement with Rowe dropped as education increased. Those with a high school education or less, 20% agreed with Rowe. Those with a bachelor's agreed less, master's agreed less. Those with a PhD who are presumably in the best epistemic position to judge the pointlessness of the evil, only 6.5% of people agreed with Rowe. To quote McAllister, if these results are, the most interesting finding of the study was that among self-avowed atheists, 70% disagree with Rowe about the pointlessness of the evil. To quote McAllister, if these results are accurate, then they put those who agree with Rowe, Draper, and their supporters in an epistemically perilous position. Few, it seems, will have strong reasons for privileging the judgment of those who agree with Rowe over those who don't. Is there some principled reason for thinking that Rowe is better positioned to make this sort of judgment than others who judge differently? In fact, people possessing a PhD, who are in the best epistemic position to judge, have the lowest level of agreement with Rowe. Accordingly, one's justification for believing that the fawn's suffering is gratuitous could be partially or even fully defeated, undermining Rowe's argument. And the same principle applies to any instance of gratuitous evil or supposedly pointless evil that's brought up. So the relevance of this is that for premise 2 in Sunseed's argument, that pointless evils exist, we're just given an intuition bump. But 97.5% of people disagree with this intuition bump when context is given. To show how tenuous Rowe's argument is, here's a completely symmetric parity argument. Premise 1, if evolutionary theory is true, then for every species that exists, there should be a transitional organism between it and the ancestral species, which is obviously true. Premise 2, it seems like there are many instances when there are no transitional fossils. Conclusion, evolutionary theory is false. The reason why this argument isn't persuasive is because creationists haven't done any serious empirical work. They haven't gone out into the world and seriously searched for transitional fossils, so the fact that it seems to them there are no transitional fossils in many cases is not surprising. In the same way, Rowe and his supporters haven't done any serious empirical work and based their conclusions on armchair philosophizing and intuition bumps. Here's what serious empirical investigation would look like. A, attempt to empirically discern the harms, the degree of suffering experienced by the animal or the human in question. B, look for the effects and then consider what the effects could have been favorably produced at a significantly lesser cost. So let's look at this specific case of the fawn suffering, and let's attempt to empirically discern the harms experienced by the animal. Let's see if we can undermine the intuition even more. Okay, so the causes of death in fire victims published in the Journal of Forensic Science International looked at 169 fire victims who died in a fire. They found that the principal causes of death are carbon monoxide poisoning, followed by carbon dioxide poisoning, while the influence of heat is considered to be of minor importance. The point is, the supporters of Rowe and Draper completely over-exaggerate the degree of pain experienced by the fawn or similar cases. since the causes of death in fire are mostly carbon monoxide poisoning and carbon dioxide poisoning, and these tend to produce complete unconsciousness. I'm not saying these ways of dying are pleasant, but they're definitely much, much, much better than burning to death. Second part of this empirical investigation is attempt to discern the benefits and whether the same results could have been achieved through less harmful means. Okay, here are the potential benefits. A, role of wildfires in ecosystems. When we specify this potential benefits, only 3.5% agree with Roe about the gratuitousness of the evil. B, on some theodicies, deer are capable of moral development like humans. I actually believe this is plausible, and I can argue for it later. Unfortunately, I don't have time during the opening statement. And C, we haven't looked at the greater evil that was prevented. Looking at like discerning what greater evil was prevented would actually take going out into the world and looking at these specific cases and determining what effects they had. And nobody has ever done anything like this. Roe and Draper are just basically sitting in their armchairs and pontificating about these cases. Here, Roe's supporters will object that suffering is still pointless because supposedly the same effects could be achieved by an omnipotent entity in a myriad of ways at a significantly lesser cost. God is omnipotent after all, or so the argument goes. But my question is, what arguments have atheists provided that God could have accomplished the same goals in a number of different ways? God can't perform logically impossible feats, and it's plausible to think that God preventing one extra deer burning to death may have massive ramifications in other parts of the system, making this event impossible. How could preventing one deer from dying have massive ramifications? God, being a just entity, would have to use the principle of fairness. If God were to prevent the death of one deer due to natural forces, he would have to suspend the laws of physics not only in one context, but surely he would have to prevent the death of other animals like, I don't know, baby raccoons, mice, foxes, etc. And why prevent the death of these animals in just wildfires? Surely the same principle, because of fairness, would apply to drowning, suffocation, any other form of death. So we can see that local changes, changing a single event, quickly escalate and ramify exponentially to the point that, to be fair, God would have to suspend the laws of physics and a massively irregular universe would result. So it's plausible to think this is the case. But as Richard Swinburne has often argued, the natural laws would need to be stable and relatively exceptionless in order to provide moral agents, including mammals capable of moral reasoning, with the opportunity to appropriately gain knowledge that could be used in morally significant contexts, which is a very important good in God's eyes. Prior to proceeding, I want to take a step back. Roe, Draper, and their supporters only provide vague appeals to intuition to support the most crucial premise of their argument. For the argument to fail, one only has to adopt agnosticism about just one of its premises. Okay, so which premise should we be agnostic about? Premise 2, pointless evils exist. Why? Why should we be agnostic? Okay, only 3.5% of people agree when even minimal context is provided. No reason given why we should privilege those who agree with Roe over those who don't. Because of the principle of fairness, God intervening may have massive ramifications resulting in an irregular universe with no moral agents. Even atheists have contradictory intuitions regarding this case, which I'm going to get into in a little bit. No serious empirical investigation of the case was done. When serious investigation is performed, it undermines Roe's assumptions. For instance, the degree of pain experienced by the deer doesn't seem, it seems to be substantially less than how it's presented by Roe. So here I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and I'm gonna present three props. So I think what I presented so far is enough to neutralize the argument from evil, but because the argument from evil premise 2 is just based on intuitions. But here I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about three problems of evil against atheism. Okay, so the contradictory intuitions. The majority of atheists endorse an intuition of existential optimism. They endorse the intuition that the world is not a bad place, that nature is valuable, that they're glad they were born. But research shows atheists are not very different from theists. So research shows that atheists are not very different from theists when it comes to the optimism bias, giving credence to the hypothesis that the majority endorse this existential optimism. But in order to hold to premise 2 of Rowe's argument, they also believe that pointless suffering is systemic. Trillions of organisms lived and died in horrendous ways, and it's built right into evolution. It's a necessary part of evolution, as my opponent said. Well, maybe he didn't say that, but he said it's a part of evolution that it produces gratuitous suffering. Not only are these contradictory intuitions that nature is overall not bad versus their systemic evil built into evolution, but we can generate an argument against atheism from it. So this is the argument from evil against atheism from Nagasawa 2024. Premise 1, most atheists and theists uphold existential optimism, that the world we inhabit is not bad, nature is valuable. Premise 2, theists can reconcile systemic evil with existential optimism by appealing to a divine plan, an afterlife, or theodicies. Premise 3, atheists lack these metaphysical resources, so have more difficulty justifying existential optimism in the face of systemic evil. Conclusion, theists have a more robust set of tools to reconcile systemic evil with the belief that the world is overall good. Now, I'm going to give 2 different probabilistic arguments against atheism from the problem of evil. So the claim is that the existence and distribution of conscious suffering is better predicted by classical theism than any atheistic alternative. First, Rowe, Draper, and their defenders are working with an indifference thesis. So what is the indifference thesis? The indifference thesis is that the condition of sentient beings on Earth is not the result of intentional actions performed by non-human persons. What this means is that nature is indifferent to our fate and conditions. But theism better predicts several features of conscious suffering than the indifference hypothesis. First thing to note is that the indifference hypothesis actually doesn't predict anything. Just think about it. If the universe being indifferent to our fate could equally predict the existence of massive amounts of pleasure, massive amounts of pain, or anything in between, so it doesn't actually predict anything. What's needed to generate a specific prediction is A, the indifference hypothesis combined with evolutionary theory, combined with the principle that pain is biologically useful, therefore it's selected by evolution. But pain is only biologically useful if it affects behavior. If it doesn't, it's invisible to evolution. Pain which doesn't affect behavior is invisible to evolution. How could pain affect your behavior? Well, pain has to be identical to a physical process in your brain for it to affect your behavior, because only physical processes in your brain or central nervous system ultimately affect your behavior. And so my opponent has to adopt the view that mental states like pain are type identical to brain processes. But mind-brain type identity theory is very implausible, that has fallen out of favor even among atheist philosophers of mind. Not only that, mind-brain identity theory is not empirically falsifiable. So for instance, it makes the same predictions as its competitors, like non-reductive physicalism a la David Chalmers. And therefore, my opponent theory contains unfalsifiable and a priori unlikely auxiliary hypotheses in order to even make any predictions. Second, theism better predicts the distribution and intensity of pain. According to the atheist philosopher Kenneth Willeford, if God was a benign creator, he could have made it such that there's some mechanism that significantly dampens pain, like a predator's teeth contains a powerful anesthetic that significantly decreases pain. So here's the what we expect on theism about the distribution of pain, regarding the distribution of pain. The expectation on theism is that there should be some mechanism to decrease severe pain and predation, according to Kenneth Willeford. And on certain theodicies, it is predicted that, so for instance, on soul-building theodicies, it is predicted that organisms who don't benefit from pain, can't develop certain virtues, should experience less pain. Because the function of pain is to increase virtue, so organisms who can't develop virtues should experience less pain. Okay, well, this is exactly what we observe. There are mechanisms to decrease severe pain and predation. First, I already went over the Fong case in which the cause of death is carbon monoxide poisoning, heat is of minor importance. But there are 4 different physiological mechanisms.
Just interrupting to mention, you have 2 minutes left in your time.
Okay, I'm gonna have to really hurry. There are 4 different physiological mechanisms to decrease pain in organisms. Number 1 is stress-induced analgesia. Beecher et al. Observed that World War II soldiers, presumably because of high adrenaline levels, suffering from major battle wounds, often experienced little pain, or similar injuries in non-threatening environments would be perceived as highly painful. In a case series, bear attack victims reported either blacking out during the attack, very little acute pain, or the hydrogen peroxide in the hospital applied to the wound hurting more than the bear attack. Now my question to Sunseed is, what indifference hypothesis predicts that? The most interesting out of this is near-death experiences. Near-death experience patients report overwhelmingly a feeling of cosmic unity, oneness, peace, and joy. So what indifference thesis predicts that near-death organisms should report an overwhelming feeling of cosmic unity, oneness, peace, and joy? Okay, I know what theory predicts this, theism. Second one is organisms who don't benefit from pain should experience less of it, which is a prediction on soul-building theodicies. Okay, this is exactly what we observe. Humans have a psychological component to pain, so experience more pain and have a more capacity for moral development. Higher mammals like chimps have a concept of self, they pass the mirror recognition test, and also have more capacity for moral development and more capacity to experience pain. On the other end of the spectrum, invertebrates don't experience pain and don't have capacity for moral development because their peripheral nerves are not connected through a spinal cord to their central nervous system. So again, the distribution of pain as predicted by theism is confirmed by empirical data. So final takeaways. In order to neutralize the argument, I only have to adopt agnosticism about one of the premises. Okay, 97.5% people don't have rosy intuition. Atheists
All right,
themselves
the time is finished for the opening. So if you want, just make one closing sentence, and then you can, I guess, cover it in a later part of the debate.
Okay, I just want to make a closing statement. You, it seems, will have strong reasons for privileging the judgment of those who agree with Roe over those who don't. Is there some reason for thinking that Roe is better positioned to make this sort of judgment than others who judge differently? No, and these people, and they haven't done any serious investigation, empirical investigation. So thank you, and I guess we'll move on to.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thank you for your opening statement. And so now we're going to head into the 15-minute cross-examination period. So I suppose it only makes sense for Sonseed. You can go ahead and begin your 15-minute cross-examination.
Well, I think, do you want to go first and do it, Aga? Or do you want me just to go ahead and do the cross?
I think you should probably go first because you started with the opening statement, so.
Sure. I mean, I think I'm fine with that. Usually it's actually the other way around. The person who gives a second opening statement then goes first and cross, but we can just do it this way. Yeah, so I guess I have a couple of questions that are clear.
Can I just interrupt for a second? I can't see your video. Are you trying to?
Oh, hold on. I'll go and stream. Yeah. Well, you probably can't see my video because I'm on, well, you have to stop. You have to.
Oh, I have to stop streaming. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is that right? I guess I just want to clarify certain things. So you're fine with me conflating what you describe as pointless evil with what I described as gratuitous evils, yes?
Yeah, I'm using pointless and gratuitous as synonyms.
Okay, all right. And so your claim is that the animals don't undergo suffering in the way that we've assumed. It's less painful. You're muted.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, that's part of my claim. I think Roe hasn't done any serious empirical investigation about how much pain these animals experience. And when we actually go out into the field, when we study these animals, we find out that there are reasons to suppose they experience significantly less pain than what is supposed by Roe. There are three different reasons for thinking that. The first one is take the typical fawn case. In the typical fawn case, the cause of death is carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide poisoning and not burning to death. Animals also have four different physiological responses to pain. One of these is stress-induced analgesia, in which high adrenaline levels decrease pain. The second one is vasovagal syncope, where unbearable pain causes blacking out. Finally, animals have much smaller brain areas which are associated, which represent pain. So, for instance, the prefrontal cortex in a human is about like that big.
Okay. So that's a lot of information. My concern can be, I guess, unpacked in this question. These individuals were asked about a single instance of pain and suffering, but what if they were asked an additional question that this same type of event, this same instance of pain and suffering, has happened millions of times and has happened to countless baby deer, even baby animals. And those circumstances are the same, where there's no one there to learn any good virtues, any good character, due to their knowing about the death of the fawn. What if they were asked if it's been happening for millions of years to millions of animals?
Okay. Well, I would say whether it's been happening to millions of animals versus one animal is only semi-relevant here, because when you say it happened to millions of animals, it's not like one single animal experienced all that pain. And if it's not the case that one single animal experienced all that pain, the fact that some animals experience transient pain or pain of the sort described by Roe, it just seems to undermine the intuition that this pain is pointless, given the fact that it's not all that clear that God could have prevented this evil, because of like if God intervenes to prevent one baby deer from dying, it could have massive ramifications because of the principle of fairness. So the fact that multiple, like trillions of animals have died this way, it seems to me, okay, that's an important fact to know, but no single animal has experienced the pain experienced by trillions of animals. It's distributed among animals. So that doesn't seem to me to be such a big concern. As big of a concern as, you know.
So I guess I'm not really the other thing I guess I'll point out is it's not merely the specific type of pain that the animal is undergoing and the fact that that might not be as painful as we think. It's the large number of animals who have to undergo it. And the example also, it doesn't merely focus on the undergoing of pain. It focuses on the fact that it's not even noticed by individuals.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
So
the fact that it's not noticed by individuals, again, is not. Sorry, did you want to say something else?
No, that's actually, I'm fine with splitting up questions.
Okay. So the fact that it's not noticed by individuals is again not so relevant in this case, because first, it's not clear to me that God could have prevented such a case, because the principle of fairness could lead to massive ramifications if God systematically intervenes, and as a result, an irregular universe develops with no laws in which moral agents don't develop. Second, on my view, higher mammals are moral agents, not to the same degree that humans are, but they are moral agents. So even if nobody sees these events, it's still plausible to think that there's some sort of benefit from it, that they might, on soul-building theodicies, they might develop certain virtues because of the suffering. And like, if I can just explain why I think animals are moral agents.
Hold on. Let me I'm going to stop you there. The thing is, you said plausible, right? Not probable, correct?
Yeah.
All right. So you know that the evidential argument is asking like what's more likely, what's more probable, correct?
Regarding what?
Given the amounts of evil described, it's much more likely that God doesn't exist. So you're dealing with something that's probable, not merely like other types of other things like possibility or plausibility, if you could define that.
Well, plausibility, as I'm using it, is just I think it's probable that animals are moral agents. So that's what I meant. Some higher mammals are moral agents. That's what I meant, and I can give you the reasons why I think that. But in terms of the argument from evil, yes, of course, it's a probabilistic argument.
Okay, so if you are if you the issue with pointing out that it's irrelevant whether or not the animal suffering goes unnoticed is that it undermines the soul building theodicy. The soul building theodicy says that these characters are built into individuals given their experience with the pain and suffering. But if you don't even if you dismiss all of this pain and suffering, that's like saying that's like saying there's a gratuitous amount of it needed for soul building, right? If it goes unnoticed, why is it happening at all?
I'm saying there's no logical incompatibility between it being unnoticed and the organism developing certain virtues because of it, because it could be useful to the organism itself. So, so the fact that it goes unnoticed doesn't clash with the theodicy that I brought up. Second, there's a different theodicy that you haven't addressed, which is the fact that maybe God couldn't even have prevented this deer from dying because systematically intervening is gonna cause the whole system to be massively irregular.
So, because it's the evidential problem of evil, I'll ask: is that a higher? How likely is that to be the correct answer? That God has some other. I mean, God can't change the world to allow, for example, just one less deer suffering, especially if that deer is not even noticed by people who can, gain virtues from experiencing that deer suffering.
Or do you mean independently plausible aside from my theory? Independently, I I don't know how probable it is. It doesn't seem like it's highly unlikely to me, and it doesn't seem like it's very likely to me. I'm agnostic about it. On my theory, though, it is the case that God just can't intervene systematically because it results in a massively irregular universe. So, but what I wanted to say is that I just need to adopt the view that it's not very unlikely in order to neutralize this argument against my theodicy. Because as soon as I say it's not very unlikely, then it could be the case that God just can't intervene. And what's the argument that that's not the case? Like you're the one who's arguing that this shows atheism is true. So I think you need to provide the evidence that this is not the case.
So strictly speaking, I'm not doing atheism versus theism. I'm giving the evidential problem of evil as an argument against theism. If I were to give something to support my theism, I would give multiple. I'm sorry, my atheism, I would give other arguments as well. So let's just focus on the evidential problem of evil here. So you mentioned the hypothesis of indifference. It seems to me like the burden is that your explanations for the gratuitous evils that are seen need to be more likely compared to explanations that are consistent with the hypothesis of indifference. So, for example, forest fires occur naturally in different ecosystems, and that explains why we will have so many baby deer die in the forest fires. That's an explanation consistent with the hypothesis of indifference. How is your explanation more likely than that explanation for the death of the millions of baby deer?
So I disagree. My explanation has to be more likely. I only have to neutralize your case for the argument for evil, not to be an argument that supports your position. So I only have to get to agnostic position, like a 50-50 position. If I get to a 50-50 position, it just neutralizes the evidential argument from evil. So yeah, I don't have to show my case is more probable. But getting back to your hypothesis, the indifference hypothesis, it doesn't predict anything. It doesn't predict that there should be suffering in the world, because indifference, let's suppose you start with the idea that there's indifference. Nature is just indifferent. Well, that could predict anything. And if it could predict massive amounts of pleasure, pain, etc. And if it can predict anything, no, it doesn't. There's no evidence that confirms the theory. So you need to flesh out the theory more. If you combine it with the idea that, okay, there are forest fires, even that doesn't predict that there should be massive gratuitous evil. There should be gratuitous evil in nature. You have to say, well, organisms. You have to combine it with something else, because, okay, start with the idea nature is indifferent. There are forest fires. How does that predict that animals should experience pain, on your view?
No, so the idea is that forest fires they're part of like a natural process. The other idea is that appealing to this natural process, like forest fires arising during a dry season, for example, is consistent with the hypothesis of indifference. Right. So if we're comparing and contrasting the hypothesis of indifference with your explanation, I'm merely pointing out that something consistent with the hypothesis of indifference is more likely than the explanation that you're offering. And it seems like you actually said that that doesn't matter. You just have to remain agnostic. But I disagree. The whole point of the evidential problem of evil is that you're showing that it's more likely that God doesn't exist, given the gratuitous amounts of evil.
Sorry, there's a little bit of lag, so
That's
sorry
fine. Don't
to
worry.
interrupt. The parts you say which are consistent with the hypothesis of indifference is that just forest fires exist, but that part of that theory is also consistent with my theory, so it doesn't favor your theory over mine. I'm saying start with the hypothesis of indifference, that nature is indifferent. Add there are forest fires. Even that doesn't predict that there should be conscious suffering, because from the hypothesis of indifference and the forest fires, you can't deduce that there's going to be consciousness in the universe. So you have to add some extra auxiliary hypotheses. And the argument that I gave is that you have to adopt reductive physicalism regarding the mind in order to actually generate the prediction that evolution would produce conscious entities. Are you?
So the thing is, I was under I thought the explanation was soul building, that these instances of evil occur in order to facilitate soul building. That's what's being compared, and I'm saying that this explanation consistent with the hypothesis of indifference is more likely compared to the explanation of soul building. No, do you think
It's
that
not more
well,
But it's not more
go
likely,
on.
because the only way it generates predictions is if you adopt physicalism type identity theory, specifically about like mental states. You have to say mental states are identical to physical processes in the brain, and that's a very implausible thesis that's been rejected by most contemporary philosophers of mind. So it's not more likely, and also it's unfalsifiable, and it's a priori unlikely. And compare that to my soul-building theodicy. Okay, my soul-building theodicy is, how is it a priori unlikely? And okay, it's unfalsifiable, just like yours. So on that, like, we're even. And the only thing I have to do to neutralize your argument is to get things like, say, like to argue that we're on par. Both theories are on par, are identical regarding their likelihood.
Okay, that's the end of the Sonseed's 15-minute cross. Do you all want to continue off on this point for Ag's 15-minute, or
No, you can do
but
whatever with his.
that is the phase that we'll be entering into. So go ahead, Agamemnon.
Okay, yeah, we can continue on this point. Do you think this is like sort of relevant? Do you think animals are in pain? As in, like, do you think rats, foxes, bears, and octopi are in pain? They experience pain? Do you think it's plausible to think that?
Yes.
Do you think like these animals have radically different central nervous systems compared to humans? Like science has shown that they have radically different central nervous systems, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then you think pain is multiply realizable in many different types of brains, right?
Yeah, sure. Animals experience pain differently from humans, definitely.
Okay, so if pain is multiply realizable, it's not reducible to any specific brain state, right?
Sure.
Okay, so do you think then pain is causally effective via being a particular or being a type? So maybe that's a little bit unclear. Do you think if pain is multiply realizable, okay, do you think particulars are causally effective, or do you think, do you think tokens are causally effective, or do you think types are causally effective?
So the distinction between type and token, I'm not really. You would have to unpack that. I've
Okay.
only remembered the terms and its associated
Okay, sure.
philosophy of mine.
I know it's a lot of philosophical lingo. Do you think a particular neurochemical event in the brain is causally effective?
So this is chemicals in the brain causing behavior. Is that what you're
Yeah.
appealing to? Yeah, I think chemicals in the brain can cause behavior.
Okay, so if you think chemicals in the brain cause behavior, but pain is a type which is multiply realizable, how do you think pain actually affects your behavior? And the relevance of this question is if pain doesn't affect your behavior, there's no way evolution could select for it. And if evolution doesn't, or sorry, there's no reason why evolution would select pain. Since it's not causally affected, it doesn't affect your behavior, and evolution only affects your behavior. And if evolution doesn't select for pain, then how does your theory predict that there should be conscious suffering in the world?
So the problem of evil just notes that there's gratuitous amounts of conscious suffering. You can pick your whichever theory you think concludes that. It sounds like you're giving an argument against something like evolutionary theory, which isn't a position that's needed to give the evidential problem of evil.
Okay, but your theory that there's indifference in the world and there are forest fires, does that predict that there should be pain? Is it equally consistent with being no pain? How does your theory generate any predictions? You have to combine it with a theory that consciousness emerges at some point in organisms, and specifically pain emerges as a result of some process, and pain is then as a response to forest fires, right?
So it makes this prediction that forest fires will cause not just pain, it will cause the death of animals. And not just pain, it's pain and suffering. The death of the animal can have blowback, other types of suffering, like the parents suffer, for example. It can also instead of causing I'm sorry.
Can you have pain without consciousness?
I don't think so. The thing
How does
about
your
it
theory
is,
predict-
I'm
How does your
sorry, what?
theory predict that there should be conscious entities? How does your theory predict that that evolution should select for conscious entities, if it can't predict that evolution or some indifferent phenomenon selects for conscious entities, it can predict that evolution should select for pain or that there should be pain. So your theory doesn't predict anything.
Which theory?
The indifference hypothesis combined with the idea that the forest fires.
It's just things that explain the forest fires that are consistent with the indifference hypothesis.
Right, it's consistent with it, but it's also consistent with my hypothesis. There are forest fires, it's also consistent with my hypothesis. The question is, does it generate predictions?
So
Okay,
I
I'm
don't
gonna
think
move
it's
on to-
consistent. Okay. Well, I don't think it's consistent with your hypothesis, given what you said.
That there are forest fires, obviously it's consistent with my hypothesis, but I'm going to move on to the
No,
next
there.
point.
Well, the hypothesis is that the reasons why forest fires occur and cause countless animal deaths is so people can, gain good characters, right? But that last part isn't a part of the explanation that's been described or the explanations that are given under the hypothesis of indifference. So they're distinct from
course.
your explanation.
Yeah, of course, the hypothesis of indifference is not consistent with my hypothesis. What's consistent with my hypothesis is there are forest fires, and yeah, that part of it. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Are you basing the idea that they're pointless evils on intuition, or do you have an inference for it?
In part intuition, yeah. In terms
Why
of
should we
inferences, I'm sorry.
Why should we privilege your intuitions over the vast majority of people who disagree?
Well, you shouldn't. That's why it's only in part.
Okay, so what inference do you have for it?
So the inference is that given the attributes of God, we would expect to see certain things about the world. We don't see those things about the world. That disconfirms God's existence. Those things are the gratuitous amounts of evil, all the pain and suffering that we see, and not merely just feeling pain. The idea of suffering comes in. It's not merely just that they feel less pain compared to humans, for example. It's that they undergo extended amounts of suffering. It's also that there's so many that undergo extended amounts of suffering, and they've been doing so for millions of years.
Okay, that seems to me to be an appeal to intuition. So people don't share your intuition 97.5%. So the inference you've given me is just the argument from evil, but I'm asking for supportive premise too. Do you have any inference for the supportive premise too? It seems you don't. It seems you only have the appeal to intuition that we should just blithely accept that there are, unquestionably accept that there are gratuitous evils. And why should we privilege your intuition over the vast majority of people who disagree?
So I give the reasons why they're gratuitous after I establish that premise and after I establish a bunch of different gratuitous evils. I did give empirical evidence. For example, humans go through cognitive decline. For example, animals suffer painful deaths due to just the fact that carnivores will eat them. For example, infants can be born with defects and die horrible deaths. Those are all empirical. Those things happen all the time.
I think you're missing the crucial question. I accept all of that. The question is, why is that pointless? Why is it gratuitous? Okay. That's the first question. Second question, have you or anybody you're aware of investigated these actual instances of evil in any systematic way? Look for the effects and then consider whether effects could have been favorably produced at a significantly lesser cost. Have you or anybody done such serious empirical work?
Well, I haven't, no.
As anybody you're aware of?
No.
How can you so confidently assert these evils are pointless?
Well, again, the idea is you think about the attributes of the God that the argument is against, and given those attributes, these evils seem gratuitous.
Okay,
Right? Like
they
think
just
about it
seem-
this way. If
again,
you're in driver's ed and they want to teach you about the pain and suffering that's caused by a car crash, they don't put you through a bunch of different car crashes so you can experience that pain. They just show you a video of car crashes. A God with the attributes of being all-knowing, all-powerful could just show us instances of gratuitous pain and suffering rather than having it actually occur for hundreds of millions of years to countless animals. Right?
Do you think though that to experience pain firsthand is a much better demonstration of the like the consequences, the abject consequences of certain human acts or certain human decisions? Maybe my question is not clear. Do you think learning firsthand the consequences of something is much better than somebody showing it to you through like a video or something like that?
I don't think it's either or. I think it depends on what's occurring. There are some things that, if you experience it yourself, will probably give you a more profound effect.
But generally, do you think experiencing firsthand is like more persuasive, better?
Well, let's use my example in driver's ed. It seems like you could be just as persuasive about driving safely by merely showing videos of car crashes versus requiring the student to go through many car crashes to feel the pain and suffering over and over again.
Well, I'm gonna have to disagree. I've been in a car crash. I've been through driver's ed, and let me tell you, being involved in a car crash is a completely different experience than watching a video. After being in a car crash, it wasn't even a serious crash. Basically, somebody ran into the back of my car, and and my airbag went off, like a couple of broken glasses, whatever. But it left me pretty paralyzed for a couple of days. And it's not like watching a video in driver's ed. So I disagree with the intuition. I'm going to move on to the next question. Do you agree? Do you concede that Roe Draper, in order to drive home the point about the pointlessness of suffering, may exaggerate the degree of pain and suffering animals may experience?
I wouldn't be familiar. The way I gave the argument was just appealing to the evidential problem of evil itself. I think that in addition to pain and suffering, even if Draper exaggerated that, Draper coupled it also with pleasure, the issues with the pleasure that animals feel.
Yeah, but the point is when you exaggerate something, it supports the intuition that the degree of suffering is pointless, right? The magnitude, what Draper and Roe is arguing is that the magnitude of suffering is pointless, specifically the degree of pain experienced by the animal. So if Roe and Draper exaggerate the degree of pain, in fact, animals die from carbon dioxide and monoxide poisoning as opposed to actually being burned alive, then obviously you would agree that Roe and Draper are massively exaggerating the degree of pain experienced. Would you agree with that?
I mean, even if they did, I didn't in my presentation. My presentation is different.
The same examples. Not only that, the same principle is applicable to any case. So, okay.
We've reached the end of Agamemnon's cross-examination, and I mean we're already mostly in free conversation, it seems like, at this point. So the next phase is a 40-minute free conversation period.
Can I get a drink of water really quick?
Sure. Yeah. Let's.
You know, I mean, if you have a question, I'm listening. Just I want to be.
Okay. Well, I guess my first question would be, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Go ahead.
He can hear you.
Do you concede that for me to win here, I only have to be agnostic?
Can you guys hear me? I can't hear you.
We can hear you.
He's okay.
Okay, so my question is, do you concede that for me to win here, I only have to be agnostic about one of your premises? I don't have to show that
No.
these evils. Okay, how come? Because if I'm agnostic about one of your premises, then the whole argument doesn't go through.
So
I have to accept
the-
each of your premises for the
likely-
conclusion to follow.
So my thing is that given God's attributes, to support such a God, you would have to counter it with something that's more likely than what's being put forward in my argument. So agnosticism isn't
don't.
enough. You have to show, for example, that the gratuitous amounts of pain and suffering we see in the animal kingdom is better explained by the soul building theodicy. But I showed how that it's clearly not.
Okay, first of all, I don't think you've shown that. The only way your theory makes any predictions at all is if you adopt reductive physicalism, but you yourself rejected reductive physicalism. You adopted
What's
a
the
view in
argument
which
for that?
while you yourself adopted a view in which pain is not is multiply realizable. Being multiply realizable means it's not identical to any specific neurochemical event in the brain. And since it's not identical to any specific neurochemical event, and you said that only neurochemical events in the brain ultimately cause behavior, then pain itself doesn't cause behavior. And if pain doesn't cause behavior, there's no reason it's selected for by evolution. Therefore, your theory doesn't even predict the existence of pain.
What I put forward is like perfectly fine for all sorts of theories of mind, not merely physicalism. You can, for example, think that the mind is separate from the brain, but it can't exist without the brain. You could be an interactionist dualist, that's called. Anyone who thinks that there's a connection between the pain and the surroundings can adopt my my argument. It doesn't matter if you're a physicalist or not.
Yeah, again, that actually doesn't predict anything. Suppose you start with the indifference hypothesis.
Well, it's not meant to be a prediction, though. Like, you don't have to be a physicalist to run the evidential problem of evil.
Okay, but I'm saying even if you adopt, let's say, interactive dualism, even if you adopt interactive dualism, the problem is with the indifference hypothesis. The indifference hypothesis paired with interactive dualism still doesn't predict that there should be pain, because you could think that start with nature is indifferent to our existence. Okay, then move to their forest fires, plus pair it with interactive dualism. Well, that theory is completely consistent with there being massive amounts of pleasure and there being massive amounts of pain in the universe. You have to add a hypothesis that your mental states course are rational, as in they produce some sort of rational behavior, or they produce behavior in a rational way. And that's not predicted by the indifference hypothesis.
So I think this only focusing on how which theories of the mind body connection can account for pain is not focusing on the actual on like the force of appeals to gratuitous evils. It's not merely them feeling pain that's being identified. It's them undergoing suffering. And then there's peripheral suffering that emerges. Baby who has birth defects and dies, slowly once they're born, maybe doesn't undergo the type of pain that Draper and Rowe assume has occurred, but there's certainly suffering that's arising. It's certainly a negative that the baby's going to die. It's certainly a negative for what the parents are going through. So it's not merely whether or not like pain states can be understood under physicalism. It's all this other suffering that arises. That's gratuitous, and that seems to make the God of theism unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that instances of suffering not only affect the individual, they also affect parents. They also affect the environment, the other people. Still, your theory doesn't predict any sort of conscious suffering, because well, to be conscious, not only that, for your parents to suffer, they have to experience pain when somebody else dies. But your theory is that the universe is indifferent to us. that they're forest fires, they're negative events, how does that predict that anybody should experience pain when somebody else dies? How does it like how do you predict that?
You can use like several views in the philosophy of mind. So you actually agreed with me on all the other things. That it's not merely the experience of pain that's being highlighted by the problem of evil. It's all this other types of suffering. For example, the parents going. So you agree with me? Parents undergo suffering when their child dies. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. You agree with me that child the mortality rates for children were much higher than they are now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you agree with me that there are many instances of this suffering undergone by parents. So I think like the experience of pain is just one aspect of it, and then you have all the other types of harm, all the other types of suffering that emerges.
Yeah. There's other types of conscious suffering besides pain.
Right. And so
Actually,
that's what's being appealed to with the evidential problem of evil.
right. Right. That was part of my presentation that humans experience psychological suffering apart from just physical suffering. And humans are basically the only organisms to experience this types of suffering because they have a stable concept of self. Which actually leads into my next question. How does your theory predict that the organisms who experience the most amount of pain also are capable of the most amount of moral development, as in developing virtues? Does your indifference hypothesis predict that in any way?
That's not. I think you're looking at it like the problem of evil isn't making like a contrasted explanation, right? That would be more like something if someone was going giving atheism as a more reasonable explanation for evil. The problem of evil is just pointing out it points out a problem with theism, but it's not like it's not saying anything about how something like atheism or something like naturalism is makes better predictions. Certainly not the
Yeah,
way
I
that I
didn't
put it
say
forward.
naturalism or atheism. I said the indifference hypothesis.
Well,
And basically
the other thing is,
evidential
I
problem.
haven't appealed to the indifference hypothesis as being the better explanation. I've appealed to the fact that explanations consistent with the indifference hypothesis are better explanations.
Okay, hypothesis consistent with the.
Right? So, like, you don't agree with the modern understanding of evolutionary biology, right?
Yeah, but
But
hypotheses
that you would agree that that's consistent with the hypothesis of indifference.
Sorry, I missed what you said. My
You
connection dropped.
you would
Can you
agree
repeat?
that hypothesis, or that evolutionary biology is consistent with the hypothesis of indifference, right?
Yes, of course, and it's equally consistent with
So it's
my hypothesis. So
but
that's
it's
not
not going to be
generating
used. Well, you're
that's
not going
not
to
generating
use.
unique predictions from your theory. What's
No, but
generating unique predictions?
remember I talked about contrasted with something like the soul building theodicy. It's a much better
I thought you said
explanation.
they're not contrastive. We're not doing contrastive
No,
explanations.
I'm
We
saying
are?
no, not the hypothesis of indifference, but I'm contrasting explanations that are consistent with the hypothesis of indifference to explanations like the theodicies offered up by theists to explain gratuitous evils. I think appealing to something like evolutionary, like how species emerge, natural selection, etc., better explain the pain and suffering that we see when we see animals eating each other, versus something like the soul building theodicy, versus something like, there's a heaven that exists, and so it's okay if there's pain and suffering. Those types of theodicies, like, they pale in comparison to the likelihood of many explanations that are consistent with the hypothesis of indifference.
I think we're contrasting two theories here. The first one is the indifference hypothesis paired with evolutionary theory, paired with whatever you want to add on to it. The second theory. Okay,
It's
I
more
include soul.
my.
I'm
sorry?
saying that theory actually makes. I'm including soul building, and I'm saying
Well,
that
then I
theory
think it's
makes.
unlikely. Like to explain, how can, for example, how can you learn, new virtues, if you aren't even aware of the pain and suffering of certain animals?
But I already responded to that point. On my view, there are certain mammals which are moral agents, and they like it doesn't have to even if the event, even if the suffering is unwitnessed by others, it doesn't mean it's pointless because it still could lead to their development, their moral development. And the reason why I think some animals are moral agents, this is a controversial point, but the reason why I think that based on their behavior and based on their brain structures. So for instance, some mammals have brain structures which are similar to humans, such as the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is activated in humans when they think about moral scenarios like the trolley problem. Some of these same brain structures are concerned in mammals. And also their behavior witnessed by other people, it could still have value to that person because it could lead to moral development.
Well, there's one point where we agree. That does sound like it's very controversial. It also, like, in the examples I
Wow.
gave, like parents having their child die, if you think it's going to build character, you would say, builds compassion in them. Are you saying that the same type of thing can occur when, I don't know, a chimpanzee sees their infant die? The chimpanzee gains compassion from that type of suffering?
Yeah, I think it's plausible to think that chimpanzees gain compassion because, and I'm basing this on neuroanatomy and behavior. And how else could we determine mental states of an organism besides studying their brain and studying their behavior? And both studying their brain and behavior are consistent with them being moral agents. So for instance, chimpanzees have mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are involved in understanding, in producing empathy and understanding the mental states of others. They have a ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is activating in humans when they think about moral scenarios like the trolley problem. And they act in cooperative, empathetic ways. So, for instance, chimpanzees have been shown to help a sick member of their group. They've been shown to take care of infants whose parents died. So yeah, both their behavior and neuroanatomy is consistent with them being moral agents. And by the way, this is not ad hoc reasoning because the Bible says that every organism under the earth and above the earth will rejoice. That the wolf will live with the sheep. That everyone will praise God at the end of times. So it's not just like an ad hoc hypothesis I came up with. It's based on neuroanatomy and it's based on a biblical understanding.
Yeah, I mean, you've been appealing to science all night. I don't think the science will agree that the myriad of emotions that arise and like different characteristics that arise from human parents suffering, are at all like at all the same from like a chimpanzee whose infant dies, from a cow who has an infant die, from a whale, from a sea lion, like a sea lion in the image I posted. There's complex behavior, but to say that that's evidence of moral behavior, you're in a minority on that.
Well, by the way, can you see my video?
Hold on a second. Let me refresh. I can't. Can others see his video?
Can you see me now?
No.
Oh, okay, it's okay. I'll just continue the rest without without video. So, first of all, what's the evidence that's I'm in the minority regarding this? Second, you haven't disputed any of the scientific evidence that I brought up. Third, I'm not saying chimpanzees are moral agents to the same degree as humans are. Could be the case that they're not moral agents to the same degree. But they do possess certain traits of empathetic behavior. They possess empathetic behavior. They cooperate. They take care of their sick. Elephants have been seen to bury their dead. And they possess neuroanatomical structures which are cognate neuroanatomical structures which are involved in moral or ethical information processing in humans. So that's the evidence that these certain animals are moral agents.
Sorry, I was unmuted. You said it was a controversial view, so I was just going off of that. I mean, already noting it's a controversial view is it's just another way of saying it's not as likely, as other explanations for the same events. Other explanations for the same events that are consistent with the hypothesis of indifference. And earlier you said that well, what were you about to say actually?
Yeah, when I said it's a controversial view, what I meant is there are bound to be people who disagree. But in order to undermine the idea, you have to either contest the scientific data or you have to contest the behavioral data. And you haven't done any of that. And I'm like,
Sure, I have
I'm
actually.
not saying, sorry?
Sure, I have. I
No,
have
no, no. The
contested.
way you contested the behavioral data is to assume that I'm saying chimpanzees are moral agents to the same degree as humans are, which I'm not stating, I'm not claiming.
Okay, well then that's fine. Then it's not the same type of moral character building that's identified with the soul building theodicy.
No, there could still be character building, as in increase in empathy, increasing in other virtues. It's just that I don't think animals are capable of making moral decisions to the same degree as humans. But that doesn't mean they're incapable of building other for certain virtues like empathy. And by the way, the neuroanatomical data shows they have mirror neurons, which are involved in empathy. So I think you have to contest the scientific data on this. But do you mind if we move on to another different topic?
Yeah, well, here's another example that will make the difference more transparent. Sea turtles will lay eggs on the beach and then just leave. And then those eggs will hatch and they run to the ocean, but they'll be picked off by other animals like snakes or birds, etc. The mother is long gone, doesn't witness any of this, right? So you're not having the same type of compassion, even if we say that sea turtles have can build moral character in a way that's consistent with humans. You're not seeing that in the sea turtle example, and sea turtles have been laying eggs that way for like millions and millions of years.
Yeah, but I don't think sea turtles are moral agents.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that's because I have independent motivations for thinking so. Independent reasons for thinking so are that sea turtles don't have the cognate neurochemical structures that humans do, which are involved in moral reasoning, and they don't show the same type of behavior that higher mammals, such as chimpanzees, horses, and elephants do. And how do you think that's a problem on my view? Because I don't think turtles or reptiles experience pain to the same degree that humans do, or other higher mammals.
It's still pain and suffering, right? The like I said earlier, the gratuitous amounts of it occurring is what's being highlighted. The other
Yeah, but
thing
you're
is
just basing that on
what's being asked is how is this explained, for example, by the soul building theodicy, which it sounds like you agree with me. It's not explained by the soul building theodicy. So you're not showing that we're less likely to see that type of pain and suffering given theism by using the soul building theodicy as a consequence.
Okay, but how is it not predicted by the soul building theodicy? You said the way it's not predicted is that reptiles, like turtles, experience gratuitous suffering, plus they're not moral agents. Okay, I agree they're not moral agents, but I don't agree they experience gratuitous suffering. That's something you have to argue for or provide an argument for. The only thing you have provided so far are vague intuitions that, even in the case of animals like deer, completely break down when you examine the details of the case. So do you have any evidence that like turtles experience gratuitous massive amounts of suffering besides just appeals to intuition?
You want me to supply evidence for animal mortality across millions of years? Like,
But
is
but
well, hold on. Are you
if
just
there's
saying you don't think that baby turtles have died in large amounts?
no, I'm not saying that.
Why
I'm
would I need
saying
to provide evidence for that?
I'm saying dying without conscious suffering, without consciousness, is not really suffering. So you have to show that animals not only die, okay, I like of bacteria die, like okay, does who cares bacteria die or flies
Mhm.
die? What you have to show is that they experience gratuitous suffering, as in the degree of pain they experience is pointless. Okay, do turtles experience the same degree of pain as humans or other mammals do, despite the fact that the size of the area which is involved in pain perception is maybe like 1/50th of the size that's present in humans? I think it's a priori implausible that turtles experience the same type of pain. But I think we should probably move on to a different point. Um,
I mean, like you said, this is a what like you said, that's a controversial view, so maybe we should.
Well, controversial in the sense that you're bound to reject it, but I don't think you're rejecting it based on any sort of data, or I think you're rejecting it based on intuition. Okay, so I have a question for you. Do you endorse the view that nature is valuable, that our environment is not bad, or natural environment? I meant.
I'm not sure what you mean by like, are you asking? You're asking me if I accept teleology?
Do you think overall nature, your natural environment is not horrible, it's not bad?
Um, well, like if we're talking in a moral sense, it just seems like it's indifferent. The hypothesis of indifferent. Well, I'm not sure. What's this have to do with the evidential problem of evil?
Well, because I'm trying to highlight, you're going to have contradictory intuitions regarding the case. So, on one hand, atheist supporters of Roe and Draper think that there's systemic evil built into evolution. On the other hand, they think nature is not bad. How could you reconcile these two ideas? And they think your life is valuable, the life of animals is valuable. How can you reconcile the idea that life is valuable, given that the suffering of trillions, billions of animals is built right into evolution? The theist has a good explanation for this. It's that, there's an afterlife, soul building theodicies. How do you reconcile this intuition or so this contradiction?
Well, I'm not familiar with what their positions are. I don't hold to those positions, so I don't feel like I need to defend them. And I also, you moments ago, we showed how the soul building theodicy was was not at all likely. You also said there's an afterlife. You think that like appealing to how evolution works is less likely than appealing to the fact that there's an afterlife when we're talking about pain and suffering?
Well, okay.
Like I think
just
there's
wanna
pain
point
and
out something.
suffering due to like theories and concepts under evolutionary biology. But you're saying that pain and suffering because there's an afterlife, that has a higher likelihood than those explanations in evolutionary biology?
Well, this goes back to an earlier point. I don't think your theory actually explains anything because you said you're asking which theory is more likely. Okay, your theory is not more likely because it doesn't predict anything. Your theory is the indifference hypothesis paired with evolution, paired with the idea that there are net forest fires, but that doesn't predict there should be conscious entities who experience pain when they get burned. In order to generate the prediction, you have to reject the indifference hypothesis. So you asking what theory is more likely is, well, your theory doesn't predict anything, so it's just a meaningless question. On the other hand, my theory does make actual predictions. It doesn't
What's the
predict just
prediction of the
any,
afterlife?
well, okay, so part of my theory is that
Given the
so
view that there's an afterlife, would we expect to see baby turtles die in larger numbers when they're
but
born?
you keep harping on baby turtles. I already said I don't think baby
So
turtles are more
that's
rated.
not a
I don't think
prediction.
they have souls. I don't think they have an afterlife, type of afterlife I'm talking about. And this is not ad hoc, by the way, because the Bible says after the like in the end times, every organism under the earth and above the earth is going to worship God. So it's reasonable to think there's an afterlife for every for these organisms. And and so but the part of my theory which generates predictions is the theodicy part. Specifically, it makes the prediction that those organisms who are able to perceive pain more strongly are able to develop more virtues, and that's exactly what we observe. You haven't do you think that's what we observe?
Um, I think that occurs, but it's not better explained by the existence of an afterlife.
Okay, but how does your theory predict it? But it's not explained by the existence of the afterlife. It's explained by my theodicy, that the soul building
Oh,
theodicy.
it's a
But
well. You
how
brought up
does
the afterlife, so I was focusing on that.
okay, I can
Yeah.
see the afterlife doesn't make predictions, but your
Okay, that's
theory
fine.
is equally unfalsifiable because because like okay, anyway, so how does your theory predict that there should be correlation between certain virtues, the ability to develop certain virtues, and the ability to experience pain?
No, so the argument is against a theodicy given by theists, and so you can assume whatever. I can even take how you think the correlation works, and say, given that correlation, the soul building theodicy is not more likely compared to other explanations for why pain and suffering arises. Like for parents to like saying that it's more likely the case that tsunamis occur, killing thousands of people, so that people watching it on the news learn learn compassion. Saying that is like much less likely than appealing to arguments about continental drift, appealing to like arguments in the natural sciences. Those are much more likely than saying, "Oh well, those people needed to die so others can, build good character."
But I think we've been over this point a couple of times already. When you say your theory, which is continental drift, explains it better, it doesn't explain it because the idea that there's continental drift plus the indifference hypothesis doesn't predict there should be consciousness. If it doesn't predict there should be consciousness, it doesn't predict that there should be pain or continental drift should produce pain. And no matter what theory you pair the indifference thesis with, it equally predicts massive amounts of pleasure, pain, or anything in between. So nothing can really confirm it.
So, continental drift predicts that there will be shifts in the tectonic plates on the world that cause things like tsunamis, earthquakes, etc. And as a consequence, populations of humans who live near those natural disasters will probably die. right? And so I'm saying that the reason that the explanation for why we see such death, the thousands of people dying in tsunamis, for example, is due to theories baked into geology, and that those are much more likely than someone saying, "Oh, the reason why we see all these people die is because other people need to become more virtuous."
Does continental drift predict that there should be conscious entities?
It just predicts that if there are if humans are conscious entities, they die in large numbers due to things like volcanism, earthquakes, and tsunamis.
Yeah, right. So it predicts that if humans are conscious entities, but from the indifference hypothesis, you can't predict that humans are going to be conscious entities, and from the idea that there's continental drift, you can't predict there should be conscious entities. You have to pair it with the idea that conscious entities exist in the first place. And even that doesn't predict that humans should experience pain when somebody dies. You have to pair it with a hypothesis that rational cognitive faculties are favored. So the rational response to dying is pain, and that's favored over pleasure. And your indifference hypothesis can't make that prediction because your indifference hypothesis is like nature is just indifferent. Do you think it's possible that nature could have produced and by the way, the other reason why your hypothesis doesn't predict anything is because you think mental states are not even reducible to brain states. You think they're produced by brain states, but they're not even reducible to it, so they can't even affect behavior. So it's your theory.
Are you saying that continental drift, you can't make predictions from the explanation of continental drift? Because it sounded like you agree you could.
No, I'm saying it doesn't predict that humans should experience pain in response to dying.
It predicts that humans will undergo what's described as pain and suffering, right? It doesn't have to be a theory about the connection between the mind and the body. Multiple theories in the philosophy of mind are perfectly consistent with continental drift. Like this this claim that you have to be committed to like some form of physicalism in order to appeal to pain and suffering. Okay.
I didn't say that. Okay, let's start with the indifference hypothesis, add continental drift, add whatever theory of mind you want. That humans
and remember it's compared to the soul building theodicy, which is more likely.
Add interactive dualism, whichever theory of mind you want to take. Do you think it's conceivable, given these theories, that humans should experience massive amounts of pleasure with continental drift?
Why would I answer something that wasn't a part of my? I mean, that's something that's a part of Draper. It's not a part of the position I gave. But I'm talking about gratuitous amounts of pain and suffering. I'm sorry.
Do you think it's equally conceivable? Do you think it's equally likely on both on the indifference hypothesis that humans should experience pain instead of pleasure instead of pain with continental drift, or they should experience nothing?
I guess nothing. But why? I mean, I'm not giving Draper's formulation that talks about pleasure. I'm talking about gratuitous amounts of evil that are caused. Like the question you should be asking is, do you think that it's conceivable that continental drift can cause tremendous amount of pain and suffering in human populations near earthquake epicenters? I do. And I think that amount of evil is gratuitous, and that disconfirms the existence of God.
So if you can see that the indifference hypothesis paired with continental drift, paired with interactive dualism, or whichever theory of mind you want to take, is completely consistent with humans experiencing nothing at all near earthquake epicenters, I thought that's what you conceded.
Experiencing nothing. I mean, the pain and suffering, even if like you think they're not feeling pain and suffering, which you admit is a controversial view, there's peripheral suffering that arises. There's plenty of suffering that emerged as a consequence of the tsunamis that killed thousands of people, not merely the thousands of people that actually died.
Okay. I think I might have to move on to the next point because I don't. Okay, the point I'm trying to make is your theory doesn't actually predict there should be pain with near earthquake epicenters. Your theory is equally consistent there with there being pleasure or people experiencing nothing at all, because you have the indifference hypothesis, like nature or whatever produced organisms doesn't care about them. It doesn't. It's not like nature which doesn't care about you produces rational organisms who should respond with pain when somebody dies instead of pleasure or anything else in between. But I think we've been over this
Do you
point.
think the people who died in tsunamis felt nothing at all?
No, of course not, but that's expected. Like, it's expected on my view that people should rationally respond to dying with pain, because I think God endowed
Well, you
humans with
think
a
pain is a
soul.
rational response?
Yes, it's a rational response to bodily damage. It's a rational response. It's appropriate response to bodily damage, and it's an appropriate response to people dying.
What's the different way? There's appropriate and then there's rational. I think they're just like appropriate you could put in terms of like evolutionary biology. It makes sense that people have pain and then feel certain responses to it. But it's not, you're describing like things that are occurring, cause and effect. You're not describing like you're not describing the use of inference rules or like coming to logical conclusions, and which is what you're doing when you're being rational.
I think pain is an appropriate response. You might not call it
Okay.
rational, but it's an appropriate response to your body being damaged or your body being or somebody dying. And the
And
point
so is
is,
it
your
impossible for God to make a world uh
no, but that's
feeling
predictable.
pain?
My theory is that God wanted to produce rational agents, agents who have appropriate responses to the environment. Therefore, it predicts that humans should respond with pain when somebody dies. But your theory
Why
doesn't
can't
predict
they
that,
respond with pleasure?
because that's not an appropriate response to somebody dying.
Well, why isn't it?
Because dying is inherently bad, pain is inherently bad, bodily damage is inherently bad, and therefore the type of response people should have is something like you should find it distasteful, you should find it um, um, unpleasant, but responding to pleasure with a pleasure to somebody like putting a needle in your arm is not an appropriate response. I want to move on to the next point if you don't mind, which
Well, how
is
much time do we have, Chum?
There's about 10 seconds left, actually.
okay. I have a question. I have one question. If
we
you don't mind.
we have closing, so maybe ask it during your closing, and I'm sure we'll continue the discussion.
Okay.
Yep. So that's time. So we'll do 5-minute closings for each of you.
So can everyone see my slides? Yep. Thank you, Chum. Thank you, Sherry. I'm just gonna go to my ending. Did you start the clock, Chum?
Yep, it'll start when you start your speaking.
Okay. Well, yeah, since I want to continue this, I have to say it was pretty fun. So the whole point of this discussion was the evidential problem of evil. And the evidential problem of evil, like you see on my slide, I'll make myself smaller, hey? Is look, God's existence is disconfirmed by observed gratuitous evil. And there are theodicies and objections to the evidential problem of evil, but as as we've seen throughout this debate, these theodicies and objections are unlikely compared to other explanations that are consistent with something like the hypothesis of indifference. It even seems like there were a lot of concessions. At the very end, it was noted that dying is inherently bad. So even if animals don't undergo pain in the same way that humans undergo, the fact that so many have died over hundreds of millions of years, countless animals too, that's gratuitous evil. That's evidence against God's existence. So even quibbling about whether or not the type of pain animals feel versus what humans feel, quibbling about what theory of mind is the best one to make sense of experience of pain doesn't matter, because we get all the gratuitous evil anyways from the inherent negative fact of death. So I believe that this point was kind of reiterated again and again and again. Remember, what I was saying wasn't some sort of case for naturalism. Isn't a case that requires something like reductionist physicalism to be true. The evidential problem of evil just notes that the attributes of God are inconsistent with our observation of gratuitous evil. That is, all powerful, all good, all knowing, all good. If God has these attributes, then this God doesn't make sense in light of all the gratuitous evils. And so this is one of the most powerful arguments against something like theism. Certainly something like Christian theism, which was appealed to during the cross-examination too. Well, again, thanks everyone for showing up. I hope my presentation was easy to see, and I guess I'll cede my time.
All right, thank you, Sonseed, for your closing. And Agamemnon, you have 5 minutes for your closing.
So first of all, thank you for my debate opponent for accepting the debate. The first thing I wanted to highlight is what it takes for me to win and for the argument from evil to fail. I just have to be agnostic about one of the premises. And which premise should I be agnostic about? Clearly the idea that there are pointless evils. Well, I just don't share the intuition that there are pointless evils. And Sunseed has done nothing all night, all day, or whatever, to give an inference or give an argument why there are pointless evils. He just appealed to intuitions. I have opposite intuitions. I have the intuition to the opposite, that life is valuable, that nature is overall good, that bad events can often lead to good outcomes. For instance, research shows that children of Holocaust survivors are more empathetic, they're more pro-social, that people affected by war are more likely to be altruistic, that people having major health issues are more likely to donate to charities. And 97.5% of people share my intuitions. They disagree with Roe about the pointlessness of the fawn's suffering, which is supposed to be the most potent instance of suffering atheists can come up with. Furthermore, there are good reasons that because of the principle of fairness, God would have to produce a massively irregular universe if he was to systematically intervene. And my opponent Sunseed didn't address that argument. Or maybe God created a world where we learn what damage we can do and how and why we must depend on God, how valuable a human being or animals are, and we can freely decide to exercise the virtues of justice, humility, and compassion and empathy. And such a world involves suffering. In any case, my opponent has given me no good reason to move away from the agnostic position and hasn't done his due diligence in seeking out all the relevant evidence regarding the cases which he calls pointless suffering. So for instance, Roe and his defenders think that the deer burns to death, when actual studies show that the heat is a minor factor during death in fire victims. What causes death in fire victims is mostly carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide poisoning. And when we look at the specifics of these cases, they undermine the intuition that the case he's trying to make. And he hasn't given any reasons why we should privilege his intuitions over the vast majority of people who disagree. And by the way, just because I admit that that dying is inherently evil doesn't mean I have to concede it's a pointless evil. Just to respond to that point. So thank you, and thank you, Sunseed, and thank you for the audience for being here.
Great. Thank you for your closing, and thank you to our debaters. GG, everyone. All right.